Good morning. I wanted to start off by saying buenos dias y bienvenidos. I am so happy to have had a whole week in Mexico. It was absolutely wonderful. And there were 5 of us that traveled together, and we had a fabulous time. So I encourage all of you to think about putting your pennies aside and joining us for that conference. It is an amazing, inspirational conference, as well as time to really regroup and refresh and just be in a beautiful environment. So I encourage you, it's every summer, to think about joining us down there next year or the year after. But like any vacation, it's always good to be home. It was good to be home with my plants and my dog and my partner, and most especially to be back in my spiritual home here with all of you. You were on our minds the whole time we were there. It's just part of, where they say, oh, you're all from Las Cruces. There were, 5 of us. We were probably the second largest group. The largest group was Santa Rosa, California. So it was really fun, a lot of fun. And as you know, right near the end, if you were here last week, Lillian unexpectedly got to join us. And so together, she and I spent a lot of time discussing this month's topic of mental attitudes and equivalence, because she knew she was up last Sunday and that I would be speaking this Sunday. So we were bantering around ideas about what it means, and we also got real excited about sharing with you some of the gems that we were experiencing there at the conference. So one of the things that occurred for me, something that was up for me actually before I went, I'd been thinking a lot about. I got to do some healing work around while I was there. And I was very glad that I got to do that healing work, because when we got back last Sunday, it was evident to me that that work was really very necessary. And that is the fact that many of you probably know that Wellspring now has a new minister. And so I got to do some releasing of some old insecurities that I was still carrying around about not getting chosen for the dodgeball team ever as a kid. And this goes way back to elementary school. But that feeling of, oh no, they're not going to choose me, or they're not going to choose us, was old and deep. And so it shows how deep some of those things that create the mental equivalent that's still housed up here in our minds can go. And it also showed me that as we are seeking to create something new, to create new experiences, new realities in the world, that there might be something old in there that's still running, that needs to be cleared or healed in order to make room for the new. In Mexico, I was reminded that my calling is a call from God, God moving in and through me, and as each one of you. And what I was also reminded of, and what I know, is that this center for spiritual living here in the heart of Las Cruces is here by divine appointment. We have a purpose in this community. We've come together, many of us walking different spiritual paths, but our paths have converged here for a reason. We've come together with a purpose. And we have a vision here. In fact, we have several visions that keep percolating throughout the center. And each one of us has a role in seeing that vision move from the mental equivalent into the manifestation. The overarching vision that the Centers for Spiritual Living has around the world is a world that works for everyone. And that was addressed many times at the conference as well. So it's all over the world. We are visualizing and seeing a world that works for everyone. And so whether your part in that is to create the perfect meal to share with us here on Sunday, to create art to hang on the walls, to create beauty that is shared with the community during the art ramble, to participate in a class and do your own healing work, because every piece of the whole that heals is that much closer to us having that world that works for everyone. Whether you're part of the social uplift ministry that's just emerging from within this community, whether you participate in or lead meditations for world peace, whether you created some of those peace cranes with the consciousness that we were seeing peace spreading throughout the world, whether you find ways to feed the hungry, whether you teach yoga or participate in yoga, whether you sit in prayer, all of that is part of the creation of a world that works for everyone. Every single one of those things is your part, your role, whichever it is, in bringing about that world that we have been visioning. And so what reminded me of this was an experience that I had in Mexico. So a few days prior to leaving, Celia, many of you know Celia, she sings, she's sung here several times. She's the one that does the looping and the drumming, the long, beautiful red hair. Well, Celia posted on Facebook, I just landed in Guadalajara, and I thought, wow. So I messaged her and I said, are you participating in the conference that's there that we will be at next week? She said, what conference? Celia had assumed she was taking a month sabbatical from performing. And she had a friend or some friends in Guadalajara that were housing her not far from where we were at the conference, a half-hour drive. And so I hooked her up with Peggy Shin, and many people have been asking me, how's Peggy? She was beaming. She is in her element. She looked healthy and happy. She's having a great time down there in Ajijic and Chapala. So anyway, so Celia and Peggy hooked up, and they found ways that Celia could provide some of her music for us throughout the time that we were there and just be a presence. She was able to sell CDs and be there with us. So that was really exciting. And what I saw, now, no offense to the musicians in the room, but one of the things that I know, having lived with a musician and also seen and interacted with many, is sometimes when you're the soloist, you get that kind of diva complex. It's kind of hard to share the platform sometimes. And we had many divas down there. Celia was one. Cynthia James has an amazing voice. She's from Denver. She was there as a speaker. But she also has CDs, and she sings absolutely beautifully. She was there. And the person that sang, Yanin Saav, who was the lead singer of the house band, beautiful voice, beautiful singer. As the week continued, the three of them started backing each other up, singing together, harmonizing together, and I watched them watch each other sing. Their eyes would sparkle. They were feeling the joy of the other person's opportunity to be on stage. And I saw that, and it reminded me that as we each sing our part, when we come together and sing in harmony, it is amazingly beautiful. And so we have a new minister at Wellspring, and she's singing her part. Unity has a temporary minister, and they meet here, and she's singing her part. I'm singing my part, and all of those who are speaking to us up here each Sunday are singing their part, and each one of you has your part. And when we sing this message of New Thought together, it makes incredible harmony and beautiful music in this community that ripples even beyond this. And so that was part of the healing for me. The other part was an aha. It clicked and dawned on me. If there are more ministers showing up in Las Cruces, it must mean there are more people ready to hear this message. It means we need to expand our consciousness to include even more and more people. That there are more people awakening to the truth of who they are. There are more people healing and ready to heal. And that there are more people ready to take these principles and the light that we learn to be in touch with here out into our community and out into the world. Not to mention the fact that we teach oneness. We believe in oneness. And so right now, at this time, in this place, in the world today, we are being called to walk our talk when it comes to our belief in oneness, knowing that we are all one and connected. Now, one of the beauties about being semi on vacation, for me, a conference is still like vacation, is that I had more time to read. And I think I shared with you before, the more beautiful world our hearts know is possible. And this book, I got a little further through, and the whole premise in this book is the idea that most of us have been raised and grown up in a world that has the view of separateness. We've been living under the story, as he calls it, of being separate, whether it's from each other, whether it's from God, whether it's countries, whether it's cities, whether it's high schools, whatever. We have been raised to see ourselves as separate. And that story of separateness has influenced everything, all those issues that are up for us today in our community, in our culture, in our country, has their roots back in separateness, whether it's climate issues, environmental issues, social or sociological issues, personal issues. Most of them have their roots in the story of being separate, of separation. And the premise of this book is that we as a human race are starting to evolve into what he called interbeingness. Interbeing, we would say a recognition of our oneness or our connectedness. So we got across the border and we got to the Juarez airport. We made it through the stuff you go through to get on the plane. We're sitting in the waiting room, and we discover at the gate that our plane has been delayed. And as we're sitting there, sort of adjusting and talking to people and trying to figure out what's going on, my aunt sent me a message on Messenger that said, "I'm sure you're well on your way, and I trust that you are safe, but did you know there was a shooting in El Paso?" No, we did not know. That kind of hit us all pretty strongly. And what we realized is that we were probably driving on I-10 past the shooting and made it over the bridge just in time. We found out later the bridge was closed. So we just made it across. So we're sitting there digesting this, having our reactions, our responses, responding to people who were immediately messaging us, "Are you safe? Are you okay?" knowing that we'd been in El Paso. And people like Sarah and Troy who've been members here messaging, "Is everybody safe?" And so we were trying to let people know where we were and adjust to the experience or the feeling that we had with that news. So as I'm reading this about the story of separateness, I realize that all of these people who have been caught doing these mass shootings, and then to wake up the next morning to Dayton, the shooting taking place 1 block away from where my dear friend has a restaurant. It just kept feeling like, oh my goodness, All of these people are described as lone wolves. People who really believe they are separate from everyone else. And in that story of separateness, they believe there's a lack in the world. There isn't enough for everyone, and they need to protect what's theirs, whether it's a belief in something or actual possessions. But there's this feeling that is pervasive from the stories that are being told about these people, that they feel very separate from others and from the world. And so I started imagining what life would be like if they had a different story. And I also started seeing this continuum and seeing that these behaviors and these feelings sort of fall on that continuum. So way over here, say, is that separation story. And in that story, then, we can find room to hate because we see ourselves as different from the other. That's where we find room to kill the other, and where we feel this need to protect some sort of limited supply that we believe in because of separation. That story of not enoughness. And then we move up the continuum. Now, I didn't spend a lot of time trying to figure out what's next and here, and here, so I'm just throwing them out, and so if you want to move them around, that's fine. But to me, it's all on a continuum. So somewhere in there is fear. And somewhere in there is jealousy. And with that jealousy comes that clenched fist. It's mine, I want it, for me. And competition. Bob read a little bit about competition in Holmes's ideas around that. Then there's that sadness and discomfort. And eventually we get to maybe some openness and willingness to learn, but we might still be a little uncomfortable. But we're willing to open our hands and see what can be exchanged. And eventually we might move into compassion, and then way on the other end, we find love and interbeingness, that awareness that we really are all one. We really are connected. And so in this book, he has a lot of thoughts that for me were new ways of looking at things. Not only did he shed light on ways of thinking that were separate that I didn't even think about. Oh, okay, yeah, I do that, But he also had new ways of evolving into that interbeingness and how that would look in the world. So because of that, I started to see this book. Cheryl Clark, one of our practitioners, recommended this to me, and I'm very grateful to her. I started to see that this book might be the beginning of how we move into the social uplift ministry that some people are being called to. Because before we can go out there and do something, we need to shift what's in here. And this helps with that process. It's helping me to see things differently and to think differently. So I'm going to start a book study on this. I haven't told the events coordinator yet, but I know the time frame is free. So I'm going to start on Thursday, September 5th from 10 to 12. I know some people have to work, but I'm hoping some of us can get started. And if we need another book and study in the evening, we can do that too. But that's when I'm going to start working on this book so we can start discussing some of these thoughts and ideas and start clearing and cleaning out some of that deep-seated stuff that's already in the mental equivalents that we are creating and seeing in our minds so that it can evolve and shift and change into something where we have more awareness and where we see more clearly that world that works for everyone. Imagine these folks that have felt so isolated and alone and feel the urge to go out and do these acts. Imagine them having been raised with an idea of connectedness, feeling their interbeingness with other people, knowing that there is enough and that we are all connected. It would be a very different experience in the world and for all of us if everyone was able to experience that. So back to us. What is your mental equivalent for our world? And what I mean by that is, where do you spend most of your mental time when you're thinking about our world? When you're thinking about our community, the larger community and the spiritual community? When you're thinking about your family? And when you think about your own personal life? Because what you're spending time on in here is the blueprint for what you see out here. So what is it that you're focused on in your mind's eye? And is there anything that's old or anything that's ready to evolve or anything that needs to be healed or is ready to be healed? At the conference, we had one of our speakers was Reverend David Bruner, and he spoke to us about a complaint-free world, and that's where this bracelet comes from. He based it on Will Bowen's book, A Complaint-Free World. And I looked for the book, and I know I have it because I saw Will Bowen speak to this at Unity several years ago. And so I had an original bracelet. The only thing I could find was A Complaint-Free Relationship was a book he wrote later. So I could find that book, but I didn't find the original. Anyway, the workshop was based on that book, A Complaint-Free World. And the premise in that is that complaining is part of that separateness. So in the world and the story of separation, there's a lot to complain about, right? We find ourselves going there, I think, quite often. And yet the idea is that complaining only hurts us. That complaining is keeping our focus on what we don't want, as opposed to speaking what we do want or having solutions that we're putting out there into the world or taking care of ourselves in a way that's less victim-oriented than complaining. So the way the bracelet works is that every time you complain, you switch the bracelet from one wrist to the other. The goal is to keep it on one wrist for 21 days, 21 days without a complaint. Now, the way he said it is that a complaint is something that you speak. It could be written, posted on Facebook, or texted. Texted, if that's a word. So those were the ones that counted. He said, what you think, if you just thought it, you don't have to move the bracelet. But even then, 21 days is a challenge. And it was kind of interesting because we were all given a bracelet. And then some people would go, okay, I'm moving it now because I have a complaint. And I felt like, okay, well, we are moving from unconscious complaining into conscious complaining, so that's an evolution toward maybe a complaint-free world or that better world, and it's a good start. But what I also realized is that we are focused this month on mental equivalence. That means what's going on in here, what we're thinking, what we're visualizing, what we're seeing in our head, in our mind's eye. Because again, what we're seeing starts to appear out in the world. And years ago, I had another habit I was trying to break. And that was the habit of arguing. I was in a relationship where we just would get into these arguments. I'd grown up in a family where sparring verbally was kind of the challenge, and I had learned to do that well. So it actually was something that gave me like a little adrenaline rush, and I had friends where we would just get topics and argue them for the fun of it. And that was just our entertainment. So as I was trying to see my relationship shift into one where I wasn't arguing all the time, I realized that in my head, I was also arguing with people constantly. I would argue with somebody if they said something on the radio I didn't agree with, argue with somebody who cuts me off, and I was constantly, or whatever, it was those discussions that you have that are you proving your point that you're right and they're wrong. That's what I'm defining as that arguing that just gets going in your head. And back then I decided, I probably need to stop this arguing in order to get this arguing out here to stop. And so every time I would see or find myself doing that, I'd say, stop, no more arguing. I really had to work at getting those things to stop going in my head. And what I learned at that time then is that the mental equivalent, when we talk about what's here showing up out here, it isn't always a one-to-one. So in my mind, I was arguing with, say, a politician or the president of the university for a decision that had been made, or I was arguing with somebody that I would never, ever have the opportunity to carry on that conversation with. But how it was showing up was the arguments in my personal life. So I was creating an atmosphere, a mental equivalent of argumentativeness, and it was showing up in my world. So imagine this. This is my metaphor. If you want a 4, you want the number 4, you want a 4 in your life. So you're creating the mental equivalent of a 4. You can see the 4, a nice fat 4 in your mind. A mental equivalent for that 4 could be 1 plus 3, 2 plus 2, 0 plus 4, 3 plus 1. All of those are an equivalent to 4. They don't look exactly like the 4, but they're still the equivalent. 5 minus 1 could be 4, and then we could go forever. But then I realized maybe the subtraction of something from my life that I wasn't expecting. I'm creating mental equivalents to add to my life, but maybe subtracting is required first. So the mental equivalent isn't the exact picture of what we're manifesting out there, but it's setting that framework for what's equivalent to that. What's the atmosphere that we're drawing into our lives? Ernest Holmes has a little section in the Science of Mind text, if you want to go to it, page 350, called Mental Atmospheres. Each person has a mental atmosphere which is the result of all that he has thought, said, and done, and consciously or unconsciously perceived. The mental atmosphere is very real and is that subtle influence which constitutes the power of personal attraction. For personal attraction has but little to do with looks. It goes much deeper and is almost entirely subjective. This will explain our likes and dislikes for those with whom we come in daily contact. We meet some only to turn away without a word, while others we are at once drawn toward, and without any apparent reason. This is the result of their mental atmosphere or thought vibration. No matter what the lips are saying, the inner thought outspeaks them. And the unspoken word often carries more weight than the spoken. Yeah. So again, where is your mind focused? What are the unspoken words that are rumbling around in your awareness, in your consciousness? So my intention when I wanted to shift away from being so argumentative in my life was to shift the conversations in my head to where I was listening more. I started imagining their point of view. What might have got them to where they are, to do what they were doing or say what they were saying? And I would start imagining their story and listening to it in my own head. I have a lot of fun in here. I was starting to try and create in my mind the mental equivalent of harmony, civil discussion, respect, oneness, and ultimately connection. Because one of the things I discovered for myself is that connection is what I've come to believe is my divine purpose, why I'm here. It's just to connect with other people. So I started trying to shift. I actually did start shifting. I still get hooked in every now and then into an argument, but I really, really, really work at not getting hooked and moving, if I can, into listening and questioning, more curiosity. So the mental equivalent is a term that I'd never heard until Ernest Holmes. And the way I've described it now to myself, it's more like the blueprint. If you think about something you're going to build, a building, an airplane, whatever, there's a blueprint. The blueprint is 2D. It's a lot of lines, arrows, descriptions. It's the thing, just not yet manifest in 3D. So the mental equivalent is that blueprint that you're creating. And then as you go through life, God, life, the universe co-creates with you to make the 3D thing, to fill in the colors and the details, the decoration, and all of that. So again, what you end up with might not look exactly like the blueprint, but that was the mental equivalent that brought about the creation. So no matter what you're creating, whatever you want to create in your life, whether you're looking at maybe a new home, a shift in your home, a new job, a new way to express your creativity, relationships improving, whatever, inner peace, world peace. Again, the most important question, what do you really want? Keep asking yourself that. What do you really want? And then what's the mental equivalent that you have for that? Where are you spending the majority of your time? Is it seeing that constructed, or is it complaining or arguing or doing something else? Where are your thoughts most of the time? I have a quote from Ernest Holmes, and this came out of this thing called You that I've kept posted in my office for a long time. And this, again, was to help me to move into a different way of thinking. I carefully guard my thought. I refuse to permit anything antagonistic or unlovely to enter my consciousness. I live in joy, in peace, and in calm confidence. I put my whole trust, faith, and confidence in the good. I think with clarity, move with ease, and accomplish without strain. So that's the affirmation from Ernest Holmes that I like to say to myself. So I mentioned before, we got delayed in Juarez on our way to Guadalajara. And I had originally thought that my mental equivalent this year was that I have my ticket, I'm going to get through all the stuff I need to get through, and we're getting on a plane at 12:55 p.m. We actually got on the plane at 8:20 that evening. So my mental equivalent, or what I thought it was, didn't show up. But as I started thinking about it, I realized that my divine purpose, the one I mentioned earlier, my greater mental equivalent that I am choosing to live life by is to connect with people. That's what I try and prioritize anytime I want to start doing something else. So Spirit provided us with an amazing opportunity to connect with people. And we did. We really did. There was a woman that Lillian started talking to that we got to meet who's in El Paso, very interested in meditation. She was very excited when we started talking to her about what we were doing, where we were going. We met another woman who had recently divorced. And the more we talked to her, each one of us had the opportunity to listen to her and to share with her and to support her. And she was very excited about shifting her thinking to positive thinking. There was a family with a sweet little baby, and I always love getting a baby fix. And I got to bounce him and talk to him and interact with this family who only spoke Spanish, so I was bumbling along in the little Spanish that I know, but it was fabulous. Kids were running around, screaming and playing, and we were just like all there together, this plane load of people in the waiting room. They gave us vouchers for food, which ended up being just fine. So I personally am not usually one who waits very patiently. I don't like suspense. I don't watch suspenseful movies. I just like things to keep moving along. So an 8-hour wait is not something that I usually do very gracefully. But my mind was already set on, I'm on vacation. I'm having fun. And I did. We had a great time. I had people to interact with, and I had so much to be grateful for. Because this year, unlike 2 years ago, for some of you who don't know, when I went last time, about an hour before we were to leave, we discovered my ticket hadn't gone through. So I did not have a ticket when I went down to Juarez. This time I had my ticket, thanks to Teresa. She made sure I had my ticket. We got through everything smoothly. We got across the bridge smoothly. And we were now sitting here grateful also for our lives. The realization of what was happening out there. We were so grateful we were alive, that we were together, that we got the food voucher so we could be fed. And I kept thinking, too, I am so glad if there is a problem with the plane, they've discovered it while we're on the ground and not while we're up there. And I was grateful for the connections we were making. I was very grateful just to be there on vacation. So one of the things that I really loved, I watched Reverend Pat's talk from the beginning of this month on the same topic. And I loved what she said about all things work together for good. And that's a quote, and what she said after it, her own words. After that, all things work together for good. And if we don't believe that, then we surrender to the stumbling blocks and crash landings of humankind as it evolves. Wow. That really spoke to me. We can't give up, was the other thing she kept saying. We don't give up. Yes, there are these things that feel like stumbling blocks. They feel like they're not exactly what we pictured we were going to get. And yet we don't give up. We continue to hold that mental equivalent. And we continue to clear and heal from whatever might be blocking it from becoming a reality. And Lillian last week was totally on fire, so if any of you missed either one of their talks, I encourage you to go on YouTube and see what they each had to say about this topic. You can do that through YouTube Spiritual Pathways. We also have a link on our website and in the newsletter. If you don't have a computer, we can hook you up here, or you can go to the library, but it's worth seeing what they both had to say the last couple weeks. So in regard to a mental equivalent here at the center, there are some people who've been holding the mental equivalent that I'm going to talk a lot more here. And so they had a pretty strong mental equivalent because Reverend Terry let me know she is not going to be able to speak next week. So I will be back next week to wrap up this concept of the mental equivalent, to share more gems from our conference, and then back again the week after that to start off our September month with the topic of stewardship from the personal to the planetary. And so what I've come to realize, because when I think about that, sometimes I go, oh, I don't have anything to say that anyone's going to want to listen to. Who wants to hear what's going on in this space? And I realize I have to let go of that old thought And I bring in a new mental equivalent, which is Spirit has something to express through me. And I need to open and let that happen. And so from our reading, what I realized, the ending of what Bob read said, the universe never toils, it flows. And so as we sat there not resisting the delay, just going with it and meeting people, and as I don't resist 3 talks in a row, I open and just let it flow. That's what happens. The words flow, life flows, my good flows. And what I know is that because we are interbeings, because we are all connected, because we are all one, the way it's working in my life is exactly how it works in your life. It flows, and so it is.